chapter 8 of Political Treatise by Baruch Spinoza. In the previous chapter, it was about monarchy. It did go into detail. In fact, the last two chapters, Baruch was exploring monarchy, describing what it is, and also giving his own suggestions on how it can be made better. Now, in chapter 8, Baruch introduces or now moves to another form of government, and that is aristocracy. And it turns out this is the last form of government he talks about. There are like two chapters also talking about aristocracy, and I'm going to create a few videos out of those chapters regarding aristocracy. Now, Baruch, I became a little bit confused while reading this chapter 8. Of course, he starts with the basics. He does tell us what aristocracy is, but that's where he kind of left me confused because the way he defines aristocracy is quite different from what we generally understand to be aristocracy. Because if I do a simple Google search or inquire from Google or ask Google to tell me what aristocracy is, this is what Google tells me. It tells me the highest class in certain societies, typically comprising people of noble birth, holding hereditary titles. But when I go to Baruch's book, Political Treatise, he kind of gives the opposite as the definition of aristocracy. And in fact, what Google is telling us to be aristocracy in Baruch's book is democracy. And he left me confused there. I did read that part many times, try to figure out, is it me who is misunderstanding his words, or is it what he's really saying? And at some point I was like, maybe it was an error. But reading further down in the chapter, I realized it wasn't really an error, is what he believed. It's how he saw it. So I will start with the basics as Baruch puts it. He says that an aristocracy dominion is that which is held not by one man, but by certain persons chosen out of the multitude, who we shall henceforth call patricians. So up to that point, that definition is kind of like clear. We can be like, okay, it's aristocracy as we understand it in modern times. But then the next paragraph, that's where he now mixes it up a bit. It's not even the next paragraph, it's in the same paragraph. He says, there are some words, then he says, well, the chief difference between aristocracy and democracy is that the right of governing depends in an aristocracy on election only, but in a democracy, for the most part, on some right either congenital or acquired by fortune. And therefore, although in any dominion the entire multitude be received into the number of patricians, provided that the rights of theirs is not inherited and does not descend by some law to others, the dominion will for all that be quite an aristocracy, because none are received into the number of patricians save by express election. So if you read that part, it's kind of like he's saying with aristocracy, because he tries to contrast aristocracy and democracy, he says the difference between aristocracy and democracy is that with aristocracy, the people chosen to rule are picked only through an election and nothing more is considered. But when you go to democracy, the people are chosen based on their birthright and also other conditions like fortune, how rich the family is. And then he goes ahead to say, if people can be patricians by simply being elected, and where they come from not really matters in terms of where they are born or the families they are born into and whether they have money or not, then that dominion is called an aristocracy. So that kind of like is the opposite of what, because I'm thinking maybe in 17th century, maybe this was the understanding of aristocracy and democracy. Maybe, I don't know. That could be the case. And then over time, we came to understand democracy as what he was describing as aristocracy. And then we began to understand aristocracy as what he thought or he knew to be democracy. With that said, he goes ahead to say in that chapter about the responsibilities, of course, of these patricians who are now the aristocracy that is ruling over the dominion, and they make laws, they implement policy, they decide on war and effort and peace efforts. Basically, they perform all the functions of a king or a monarch, but the decisions are made through voting. They have sittings and then they vote on different decisions. To some extent, it's like modern day parliament, but with some executive power. I would say that's what aristocracy was, according to how Baruch describes it. So that's what he calls aristocracy and how is somehow different to how in modern times we understand aristocracy to be.